Welcome back to the Business Book Club, where we turn complex stories and ideas into practical lessons for business, leadership, and life. Today, we're diving into The Big Short by Michael Lewis, one of the most gripping and revealing books about modern finance ever written. It's the story of how a small group of outsiders saw the global financial crisis coming long before anyone else did, and had the conviction to act on it. But beyond the drama of Wall Street and billions made and lost, this is a story about vision, risk, ethics, and human behaviour, lessons that stretch far beyond finance. The book begins in the years leading up to 2008, when the housing market seemed unstoppable. Banks were lending freely, credit was cheap, and everyone from homeowners to hedge funds was betting that house prices could only rise. Mortgage-backed securities, bundles of home loans repackaged and sold as safe investments, were being traded globally. Michael Lewis introduces us to a handful of unconventional thinkers who noticed that something didn't add up. People like Michael Burry, Steve Eisman, Greg Lippmann, and Charlie Ledley. They weren't traditional Wall Street insiders. In fact, most of them were misfits, data obsessives, skeptics, or outsiders who questioned what everyone else took for granted. Michael Burry, a doctor-turned-investor with Asperger's, spent hours digging through individual mortgage loan data. What he found was shocking. Many of these loans were given to people who couldn't afford them, had no income verification, and were already defaulting. These were the so-called subprime loans. He realized that if these borrowers began to default, which was inevitable, the entire structure of the mortgage market would collapse. But the markets didn't see it that way. The ratings agencies had stamped these products AAA, supposedly risk-free. So Burry did something radical. He invented a way to bet against the housing market. He worked with investment banks to create credit default swaps, essentially insurance contracts that would pay out when the mortgage bonds failed. At first, everyone thought he was crazy. The market had never fallen before. But he wasn't betting on history. He was betting on mathematics and human behaviour. Meanwhile, other outsiders began seeing the same cracks. Steve Eisman, a blunt and outspoken fund manager, became furious at the corruption and blindness of the system. He wasn't motivated purely by profit. He was outraged by the stupidity and moral decay that allowed it all to happen. His story brings a human conscience to what could otherwise be a cold financial tale. Then there's Greg Lippmann, a trader at Deutsche Bank, who saw the opportunity to make billions by selling the short, convincing other investors to bet against the system. He became a bridge between the outsiders who believed the crash was coming and the establishment that still didn't. As the book unfolds, Lewis exposes a web of greed, ignorance, and overconfidence. The financial world was driven not by logic, but by incentives. Traders made money on volume, not on quality. Rating agencies were paid by the banks whose products they rated. Regulators looked the other way. By 2007, the cracks turned into collapse. Homeowners began defaulting en masse. The securities once seen as safe started imploding. The outsiders who bet against them, the ones who did their homework, asked questions and held their nerve, made unimaginable fortunes. But their success came with an uncomfortable truth. They were right about a disaster that devastated millions of ordinary lives. Michael Lewis uses the story to ask deeper questions about human nature. Why do people ignore warning signs? Why do systems reward short-term thinking? And why do we confuse confidence with competence? His answer is that people see what they want to see. When everyone benefits from believing something is true, whether it's an overvalued housing market or a flawed business process, very few people are brave enough to challenge it. The Big Short isn't just a story about finance. It's a study in psychology and leadership. Housel, from our previous episode, might call it a lesson in incentives. When the reward system is broken, even smart people make stupid decisions. Lewis calls it the blindness of greed. So what can we take away from The Big Short? 1. Question the consensus. Just because everyone believes something doesn't make it right. True insight often comes from asking naive questions and refusing to follow the crowd. 2. Incentives drive behaviour. People respond to rewards, not logic. To change outcomes, whether in business or life, you have to change the incentives. 3. Information isn't power without courage. Many people saw the data, but only a few acted. Intelligence matters less than conviction and resilience. 4. Systems fail when ethics fail. The crisis wasn't just economic, it was moral. When profit outweighs responsibility, collapse is only a matter of time. 5. Prepare for the unthinkable. Risk hides in plain sight. The biggest dangers often come from assumptions we no longer question. Michael Lewis writes with precision, wit, and moral clarity. He doesn't just explain what happened, he reveals how the same mindset that caused the 2008 crash can appear anywhere, in leadership, business culture, even personal finance. It's about what happens when success breeds arrogance and when complexity hides truth. The Big Short is ultimately a story about perspective, about how a few people saw differently, thought independently, and acted when others froze. It's a call to lead with clarity, integrity, and curiosity, even when it's uncomfortable. Because leadership, like investing, isn't about predicting the future. It's about seeing reality clearly when others refuse to. That's it for The Big Short by Michael Lewis. Thanks for listening and see you next time.